So the big purpose framework that actually we've covered in this mastermind has been super, super beneficial to me. Again, I always had a kind of general sense of the why of what I was doing and the need of it. I've spoken with hundreds of students and various kinds of creatives and artists, both in terms of launching Artnerd Society, but also well before that in terms of my personal experience in specialized art and design education, also just as a practicing studio artist who lives among many practicing studio artists or people attempting to be practicing studio artists here in New York. And the need for community, the need for lateral education, for continuous education in creative fields is huge right now. It's an opinion, but I think it's a well researched or well founded opinion, is that formalized education is failing creative people forever. They have been for a very long time, and they continue to do so. It's insane to me the amount of confusion, the amount of bad advice that people who are interested in, again, creating things of meaning, interested in creative visual expression, visual communication, the amount of bad advice and the amount of, again, just sort of systemic oppression might not be the right word, but it's certainly a distraction or an authoritative kind of downplaying of a lot of this stuff that is really unfortunate because, again, it squanders potential. I've known so many students, so many creatives, so many artists of all kinds of stripes who sometimes they're 60 years old and they really wanted to be an interior designer, but instead they went down a different path, not because they wanted to or that they felt they were helping other people, but because the systems in place and the culture and the social sort of pressures in place prevented them from doing that. Again, there's all kinds of interesting conversations about that, and it's not just about visual expression and visual art, but also just about creativity in general, and that it is essentially taught out of us. So instead of collaborating, instead of being creative, you're taught to silo yourself away and also to basically do what you're told. Again, we're dealing with systems that were designed for educating people to work on factory floors and then for higher education to manage the people on factory floors in very specific kinds of ways that, again, I could talk about forever, but and the idea is to kind of break out from that. Again, if there is an area, if there's a domain, if there is a group of people who I think could really revolutionize the way that things are done in terms of continuous education, in terms of practice, in terms of practical education, it's artists and designers and photographers and people who understand what it means to maintain a studio practice, to have a balance of theory and practice, to actually deliver something, whether it's an amorphous kind of conceptual idea or something more practical like a painting or a photograph. So, and at this point, there's a huge filtering mechanism because the systems are so geared against people doing that. You have to have a really strong kind of will, or just be stubborn like I am to continue at it, to keep banging your head against the wall despite the lack of sort of external approval. And that's okay. So that's the sort of constituency that I'm aiming towards. And again, this whole process has been really useful to kind of articulate in a more concise way. And I do like the idea of the journey or the hero's journey in terms of any of this. But also just, again, going back to the why of this. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Why does Artnerd Society exist? What's the purpose of the community? And again, if there's one weakness in terms of my initial launch about a year and a half ago, is that I understood that, but I don't think I did a very good job articulating that, other than amorphous kinds of ways. So I think this will be a huge step in the right direction, both for the relaunch of Artnerd Society, but also to encourage people to engage with this and to again, hopefully get people as fired up and excited about this whole potentiality as I am. So I'll go ahead and read this out just for kicks, but so Artnerd Society is a community bringing together a diverse group of artists who want to redefine what a viable, balanced, creative life looks like in 2019. If I can wave a magic wand, what each person takes away from this community is connection with like-minded individuals who seek to create meaningful things of value and share them with the world. Clarity of what works and what doesn't when it comes to designing a viable career path in an ever-changing cultural and economic landscape. Inspiration and collaboration from fellow creatives making amazing work regardless of specialty, skill level, or circumstance. So I want to touch on a couple sort of larger themes within that are hugely important in terms of, again, my intent and the design of this community. I struggle a little bit with artists or creatives, but again, I use artists in the terms of the broadest sense. So designers are artists. The focus will be more on visual artists, but I think that a poet or a musician could certainly get something from this. And this kind of flies in the face of conventional wisdom in terms of, again, niching down to make commercially viable products. But I'm hoping that it's not too broad. I'm hoping that these things that we discuss, this collaboration that we are moving forward with, is viable enough and interesting enough to help people with all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of specializations and knowledge bases and those kinds of things. The concept of diversity, again, is sort of a hot topic in some ways, which I think is a good thing, but it tends to get simplified usually, at least within the education context, of underrepresented students and again, socioeconomic diversity, and as well as racial diversity, which is tied into all of that, which again is hugely important, very good. One of the ways that's going to manifest, at least dealing with socioeconomic and which will correlate to racial diversity, is, at least within our Artnerd Society, is to make the core membership free. That's really important to me. That'll make it a little bit more difficult to make it kind of financially viable, but I think with the subgroups and the collaborations that there'll be potential, as well as creating a system of what would be called patrons, I think, who want to support the mission, want to support the vision, so that people, at least as far as I can help within this process, will have access to a huge amount of stuff, regardless of being able to pay for it. But diversity sort of expanded on that also means diversity of medium, diversity of experience, diversity of skill level. One of the, I think, the huge weaknesses of the current education system, and in particular when it comes to studio practices, is that it's based on an authoritative model. So again, you have one person up on the stage or one person in front of the lecture hall, even in studio classes, who is dictating how people are supposed to be creative, which doesn't work very well. They're dictating how they're supposed to draw. They're dictating how they're supposed to learn. And occasionally you'll get a professor, you get an educator who actually is more collaborative, who actually encourages engagement among students. And those kinds of classes are without a doubt the most effective classes. I speak from personal experience, but there's also studies about this in terms of authoritative teaching models versus more collaborative kinds of models, in terms of retention and retaining information, retaining skill sets, using skill sets. And anyone who knows anything about collaboration knows that diversity is key. If you are collaborating with 30 people that are just like you, the kind of work that gets produced from that is going to be super limited. It's going to be super fragile. It's going to be super less interesting than if you have a diverse group of people across the board who are contributing their experiences, who are contributing their opinions, their knowledge base, no matter what it is, whether it's cultural, whether it's socioeconomic, whether it's experiential, whether it's skill-based, whether it's age-based, any of that. the more diverse the group, the stronger the stuff that's going to come out of it, without question. The more interesting it's going to come out of it. And organically, you're going to go off on all these amazing tangents as you're collaborating. And that's irregardless of medium. That's irregardless of intent sometimes. So, diverse group of artists. So people just getting started, people at the end of their career, people who have zero experience, people who have 50 years of experience as a creative, as an artist, as a designer. And I am a firm believer, as an educator who's worked for years and years and years doing this stuff, that even those who are in authoritative positions have a lot to learn from those who are just getting started. Even if it's just the kinds of questions that they ask, it's the kind of perspective that they have, especially given the dynamic nature of the landscape out there in terms of creativity and also in terms of the financial and professional landscape. If they are doing the same thing that they have been doing 60 years ago in the same way, then they're going to be super limited. And it's up to them to open themselves up to this other stuff that's going on. But it's happening whether they like it or not. So again, that diversity is a huge, huge defining factor of what Artnerd Society is going to be in terms of the overarching umbrella of that. Now, it doesn't mean we can't get into specialized little groups of people who, again, need help with drawing or foundation skills or color theory, or are super interested in animation, or just want to talk about visual branding. I mean, there's all kinds of opportunity to do that. And I'm hoping that some of those organic groups and collaborations will kind of come forth as people have discussions. And there's a lot of potential to do that, I think. Viable, balanced, creative life. This is what we all struggle for. Again, this is kind of what the promise is. This is what we are striving for as creatives, as artists, as designers, is not to make work for work's sake. It's to maintain a studio practice so that we are fulfilling emotional, psychological, and professional needs, not just during art school, but throughout the entire life. There is, again, a bad kind of message out there a lot of times, especially for students who are interested in this kinds of stuff, that, again, well, it's great that you love painting, but that's just a hobby. You're going to have to go get a real job eventually. And even those, so that filters out so many people even before they go to, like, say, a specialized art and design school. But even those that go to, say, a Pratt, or where I used to work, or Parsons or RISD, or go to specialized ACAD types of schools, it's like, well, that was a great experience. That was college. Now you need to go get a real job. And that's nonsense. There are ways to do this that aren't limited to showing in a gallery. There are ways to leverage the skill sets that you are developing, the creativity, the understanding of visual language, the specific skill sets that you are capable of doing, or even just the fact that you know how to collaborate, or that you know how to explore something visual, are hugely valuable skill sets. And to maintain a studio practice is a skill set that requires certain foundational and fundamental kinds of things that can be applied and can be leveraged in all kinds of ways, whether it's a financial way, whether it's to support yourself. And it may not be doing your specific work in your specific way, but you can leverage that in tangential ways that are hugely beneficial. And art schools do a terrible job of educating students how to do that. I'm sure some career center in some school is probably fantastic, but in my personal experience, most fail miserably. So there's a huge opportunity, not just for recent college graduates or people who just graduated from high school, but to educate and to have continuous learning throughout your creative career, and to have that not just be effective, but also balanced, so that you're not working 90 hours a week unless you really want to. It gives you the autonomy to use your skill sets, use your knowledge base in ways that benefit others, which then hopefully will have financial benefits, as well as kind of emotional, personal, and creative benefits for you. So, and the idea is that we do it all together. We help one another. We see each other's example. We're inspired by each other's work. If there's specific skills or knowledge that is helpful at the time, then you can share that. But to give access to that in order to create that viable creative life, essentially, that will last you until you're 105 years old, hopefully. This speaks to, again, connection with like-minded individuals who seek to create meaningful things of value and share with the world. So, again, same kind of thing. The connection is key. It is in the conversation about higher education, again, whether it's worth it, whether it's worth the money, especially within specialized art design education. The thing that gets thrown out most, whether it's BFA, MFA program, any of that is, well, it's great because you'll make connections. It's great for your networking. It is not necessary to pay $50,000 a year to a specialized art and design school, $100,000 a year if you include costs, or 75 or 90, whatever, a ridiculous amount per year in order to connect with like-minded people, artists, creatives, any of that. In fact, that can actually be a poor siloing effect where you kind of assume that, oh, if I just go to this place, if I just get access through the gatekeepers, then everything is going to work out great just by being there, which is just a bunch of nonsense. Learning how to connect, learning how to network, learning how to collaborate with people in an authentic way is a learned skill set. And you do not need a formalized, siloed off garden in order to do that. And the idea is, this where the diversity comes in as well, is that most artists that I know, no matter what level they are at, are super generous about their practice, about what they do, about sharing their knowledge. I've taken classes with people like Marilyn Mark and Bruce Davidson, and the thing that blew me away in terms of those workshops, besides their availability, these are world-renowned photographers who do not need to be teaching weekend classes, but they got a lot out of that connection, and they were super generous. So again, that model is amazing. And it really only takes a couple of experiences like that to really kind of get you on the right path, to cut through all the BS of the conversation that surrounds a lot of this stuff. So again, that connection, that collaborative gravitational point should not be limited to private art schools, should not be limited to hyperly gate-kept organizations and systems. So again, transparency is key, generosity is key, and again, that connection is super important. And in today's day and age, again, there's no reason not to do it. And it does not mean a Facebook group. It's more in depth than that. Clarity of what works and what doesn't work when it comes to designing a viable career path in an ever-changing cultural and economic landscape. Hugely difficult to find clarity. We suffer from too many options, as we always do. So, and there are always people willing to sell you on your own potential. So, for instance, in photography, there are a billion kinds of different pieces of equipment you can buy. And the marketing geniuses at Nikon and Sony and Fuji and any of those kinds of tech or companies are super excited to have you dream big, and all you gotta do is buy this camera and all of a sudden you're gonna be a world famous photographer. Obviously that doesn't work. It doesn't mean that technology and equipment and tools aren't important, but it's the least important part of all of this stuff. So this is where it gets really important, because you can gain that clarity through other people's experiences. This is where, again, at Mighty Networks, I think it's an amazing framework where experience trumps advice. Advice gives a certain kind of clarity, but it's an end of a conversation. The increased clarity is going to come from engagement, and not the first tier of conversation, the second and third and fourth tier, so that it allows the person who's asking the question to kind of judge and gauge what's going to be useful to them. So that kind of clarity comes from that connection. The kind of clarity that comes from watching a YouTube video is great, or watching some sort of passive thing is fine, but it's a very shallow level of clarity a lot of times. The way you push that, the way you engage with that and the way you should be questioning that is through, again, engagement with other people, other creatives, other artists, hopefully a diverse group of people that can give you useful knowledge and experience so that you can make your own decisions in terms of any of that, and the clarity will then come. And that's really important right now because things are changing too fast. Way too fast for you to be able to keep up with all of it. And it's not about buying tools. It's not about finding tools. It's not about technology. It's about, again, the leveraging of those knowledge bases and understanding what you really need, understanding what questions to ask. And that comes through that engagement. That comes through that connection with other people. And obviously inspiration and collaboration from fellow creatives, making amazing work regardless of specialty, skill level, and circumstance. So again, that cuts back to the diversity a little bit. I can't think of a single artist at any level who wasn't blown away at some point by a piece of art. It doesn't matter if it's a piece of music or a photograph or a painting or a play. The thing that carries us through, again, these systems that want to prevent us from taking this stuff seriously usually is seeing someone who has done it at an extremely amazing level, at an extremely connected level, and then connecting with that thing that they created. Again, they created something of meaning, not just for themselves, but for someone else. So that inspiration is key for motivation, for mindset, for everything. And nowadays, even as I'm jaded and cynical about the art world in general, the way I feel connected to a piece is usually when I am so jealous of what I am seeing. If I can kind of blow it off or dismiss it or whatever, I'm like, okay, well, that's nice. I understood how they made it or whatever. If there's an art piece, again, it doesn't matter what medium, what approach, or it could be a book or it could be a piece of music, that literally says to me, man, I wish I had made that. And the idea is you can't do that unless you're introduced to these kinds of things. Again, if you're not looking at work, it's very difficult to have that experience. If you're not engaging with artists, if you're not engaging with cultural artifacts, then it's very difficult to kind of be inspired by them. So the idea is to get insight, get transparency on what other people are doing, no matter medium or any of that. So again, to see their work, to see their website, to have conversations with them, both live and asynchronous conversations, and then also to collaborate in direct and indirect ways, so that everybody can benefit and everybody can move forward. So again, a very long conversation here, but I think it's important, and I do think that I'm feeling better about the big purpose. Again, we'll see how I can articulate it in terms of the message that goes forth, but I think the potential is there to do all of these things, to design something that is going to be super beneficial, that is going to allow artists and creatives to, again, move forward professionally, creatively, in terms of their practice, in ways that they want to move, in ways that feel intentional, in ways that feel autonomous, and also ways that are viable financially, emotionally, energy-wise, and to be comfortable and present in what they're doing and how they're doing it. And I think if there's one area that community can really thrive, it's in doing that in all kinds of ways. So I'm super excited. We'll get into some of the articulation or the iteration or the manifestation of, again, this big purpose. And like I said, it's still a work in progress. There may be some details that get worked out sooner or later, but But I'm super excited about this more refined vision and its potential to hopefully get people on board. Hopefully we get people following and coming along for the journey. So thanks.